We all doing all right today? We love to hear it. So just hear from me for a little bit. Hi, my name is Cameron Allison. I'm the manager of film and lecture programs. First and foremost, I would like to thank all of you for coming out and supporting art and academia. Hi, Dr. Weinberg. I also want to thank you all for joining us 2 weeks. It's been 2 weeks, right? So we were originally supposed to have this lecture on March 1st. Unfortunately, our speaker could not join us due to family events that, things happen. But luckily enough, our own Caroline Rocheleau stepped in. So thank you, Caroline, for that. And she's also given me the honor of introducing her, which I will do from this script that she wrote for me. Verbatim. Our speaker today is none other than our very own curator of ancient collections, Caroline Rocheleau, who is stepping in to save the day. Caroline received her PhD in Egyptology and Nubiology from the University of Toronto, Canada. She is an archaeologist specialized in ancient Nubia and has excavated the royal city of Merowe. Thank you. Sedinga, is that two? Okay, and we're gonna go for three. Dangel, all located in Sudan. Thank you, I deserve that. Over the last decade, Dr. Rocheleau dedicated her time and efforts to the ancient Greek, Italian, and Roman holdings at the NCMA. The systematic catalog of that collection, on which she collaborated with multiple scholars, will come out at the end of April/early May. Yes. A member lecture is planned for the end of May, where Caroline will share behind the scenes moments regarding the incredible research that has gone into that project. Caroline is now going back to her Nubian and Egyptian roots. She is the coordinating curator of Ancient Nubia, Excavating Treasures of the Nile, a traveling exhibition originating all the way from MFA Boston, hosted at the NCMA this fall. Today, she is taking a walk down memory lane, reminiscing about the last 20 years of Egyptology at the NCMA and what is on the docket for the next few years. And now, Dr. Caroline Rocheleau.
We'll try. Well, thank you, Cameron, for this lovely introduction. Usually, I'm the one introducing the Weinberg speaker, and today I have to say it is quite an honor to be the speaker. This was unexpected, but it is pretty much our most beloved lecture related to ancient anything at the museum. And it's been ongoing since 2012. And as Cameron mentioned, this was a rapid turnaround when our speaker informed us that she could no longer join us. However, I'm telling you now, she's our speaker for next year. And so I had to come up with something quickly. And I thought, well, why not reminisce on the last 20 years of Egyptology at the museum? Because that's the reason I was brought on board. That's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, except for those 10, 13 about the Greek and Roman stuff. So today, diving right back into Egyptology, as Cameron mentioned. So 20 years ago, well, a little bit over 20 years ago, I submitted my dissertation, and unfortunately for me, one of my professors passed away. The other one on the committee was on sabbatical, and only one of my 3 professors could read my dissertation. So I had to wait, and while waiting, I thought, let me look for jobs or fellowships. And there was one in particular that attracted my attention. It was at a museum I'd never heard of, but I knew the city was named after Sir Walter Raleigh, an explorer under Elizabeth I, and that it was not too far away from Duke University. The advert for the curatorial fellowship listed that there was going to be a partial redo of the Egyptian gallery, that the museum was going to host a big Egyptian exhibition from the British Museum, that there were plans to study the Egyptian collection for an eventual catalog, same thing for the Greek and Roman catalog. And at the bottom of the ad, it said, applicant must have European or American specialty. Scratch, scratch. Why are you listing all these wonderful Egyptian projects and you want an American or European specialist? To me, that made no sense whatsoever. And I emailed the museum asking, do you have that fellowship for other collections? So the response was, well, I will forward your email to the curatorial department. In the meantime, please send me a resume. I had one ready. I was looking for jobs. Send that off. And not too long afterwards, I got a response saying, we've waived the criteria. Please apply. I was supposed to be here for 9 months. I've been here 20 and a half years. So I either made myself very useful or there really was a need for an Egyptologist at the NCMA. So any of you remember these galleries? The photo was taken in 2004. This is what it looked like when I arrived at the museum. This was in this building. As you went down the stairs, you had things on either side of the staircase. My first day at work was a great shock to me because I walked down into those galleries looking at the objects. And of course, as an Egyptologist, I went straight to the coffins. That's sort of the symbol of Egyptology, if you will. And the adventure started with this particular coffin. In the galleries, this is a page from the catalog. I don't have a photo going back to 2005 of that label specifically. But as I'm reading the label, I look at this and suddenly it goes like, oh my God, who do I speak to get this fixed? Because what we have on the label, well, is completely wrong. It is not, this coffin is not from the late period. It is from the third intermediate / late period. And it said, and let me go back here for a second so you can see better, Dynasty 22 to 33. There are 30 dynasties. So it's a typo, first of all, for 23. But just looking at this coffin, I was like, no, this is not Dynasty 22nd, 23rd, this is 25th, 26th. Who do I tell this information to so we can get this label changed? So this is like day one, within just a few hours of having been given, like, do this, sign this, blah, 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 off you go. Day one. So really my job was cut out for me with the collection. And I thought it was a great collection. And when I signed up or I sent in my application, I thought this is a place, even before seeing this label, this is a place where I can make a difference. What's the point of applying to the Met, where you have already, like 7 Egyptologists, or the Louvre, or the BM, or wherever? They've always had lots of Egyptologists go in and out of those doors. Why not this smaller museum that has never had an Egyptologist walk through the door? So that's what really brought me here. So this is just fresh out of grad school. We take the coffins out of the galleries, bring them to the conservation lab. And because the first thing that the curators asked me to do was, can you please tell us what those darn hieroglyphs say? We want to know. So that was my first self-appointed task, to translate all the hieroglyphs on the coffins. Well, it was much harder than I thought, even though I was straight out of grad school. The coffin of Jedmut has over 203 columns or row of hieroglyphs. So when you're translating, and we didn't even have really good photos at the time to work with, I had to work with the original, which is always the best, and then sort of made like little sections, how many columns, number them, and then have the photographers afterwards take photos so detailed that if I had missed something, I didn't have to deinstall the object again. I could work straight from the photographs. So these are the photographs that came later. I did not have access to this when I started translating. And it got very confusing at some point, but I knew what to expect. These are funerary inscriptions, offerings and incantations, and you will usually find the person's name written on there, and often their title, if it's listed. If you're lucky, even their parents might be listed. So we do have that for this coffin, but why it was so difficult was because the side that I started on, which is just by looking at the photo, so it's the left side, the grammar was horrible. The scribe clearly was not the lead chief, most expert scribe in the world. It was the student who had yet to master the skill of grammar and things like this. So there I am, straight out of grad school, going, oh my God, I forgot everything over the summer. No, I didn't. It was just a really poorly written text. And what tells me also that there's at least 2 scribes who worked on this coffin is the handwriting. They write the signs differently. It's the same signs, but different. And I was told that the clicker doesn't work, so I have to use the mouse. So if you look, for example, at this viper sign here, the snake, this one is very flat. But when you look at the same side on the other side, this one's a little bit more curvy. That might be hard to distinguish at first, but if you look the next sign, this is the spelling of the name Jedmut, by the way. So if you look at this vulture right over here, has a long neck, very sharp, like those wing tips, I guess, the shoulders right there. If you compare with the other side, there's 2 lines in the middle. And the head is not quite as sticking out as much as the other one. So, and you have that consistently on both sides. They do not write the signs in the same way. So it's like anybody's handwriting. We can write our letter A, which is a circle like this, or you can go like that. It's still the letter A, it's just written differently. So you have the same thing too with one of the offering formula. This sign in particular, which is a plant, so sort of a curly thing at the top, and then you have, of course I have a microphone, it's hard to do. So like the 2 little, the sedge plant. So you have these lines are diagonal, while on this side, they go right across. Again, the sign is written differently. So I spent a lot of time with the coffins, and then there was this mysterious object that my predecessor, Mary Ellen Souls, she was a little bit embarrassed to talk about this, and I can see why. And she's telling me, because I asked her, like, this is the stuff in the galleries, I can see that. Is there anything in the storerooms that I can look at? Or is everything on view? And she's like, no, there's a couple of objects in there. And oh, can I see them? I was like, oh, but this one, oh, goodness. And she was this prim and proper New England lady. And she's like, oh, I think we've been had. I think it's a fake. And she's describing this little thing to me that they thought it was a falcon mummy. But when they did the x-ray, there were no bones to be seen. And they even did a CAT scan. Nothing to be seen. And just to show you, because we have evidence, so this is what was expected. a falcon mummy. There's plenty of those. They come by the thousands, if not the tens of thousands in Egypt. They date to the late period and later. But this is what the X-ray was. So I can understand her disappointment. Now, this is what I thought. It's a grain mummy. And she goes, what on earth is a grain mummy? Well, let me tell you. So this is what we have, this very lackluster little bundle. But a grain mummy has nothing to do with falcons, despite the fact that there's a falcon coffin that accompanies it. It is just one of the representation of the deity represented on the coffin. But this is associated with the god Osiris. This is what other grain mummies look like. One from my sort of home museum in Toronto where I worked when I was in grad school. Very similar. The falcon coffin is a little bit different, but what is inside is not a bird. What is inside is a bunch of grains. Think of a chocolate chip muffin. So instead of the dough, you have mud, and instead of the chocolate chip, you have grains. Put that together, shape it like a little mummy sort of thing, and you get an Osiris mummy or a grain mummy. And that's what the inside looks like. This one is a broken one from the Met. So no, it is not a fake. It is a genuine ancient Egyptian object. And we took the x-rays again. Some of the Friends of Judaic Art were kind enough to invite us to their clinic where we could use, well, we didn't use, they used it. We could bring the grain mummy to be scanned once again. And it basically confirmed what I was thinking. It is indeed a grain mummy. That's what it looks like on a CT scan. And because this is such a cool thing, we had an exhibition about this in 2019. So I'm going to be jumping over the last 20 years. I'm not doing this chronologically, but just pointing out some of the projects. So that was actually a fun little scientific, basically, exhibition. People think we don't do a lot of science in an art museum, and that's completely untrue. We do a fair bit of science working with the conservators in our conservation lab. So another little bit of science here. In the files, people were divided because if you don't have staff expertise, or even when you do, you sometimes reach out to colleagues like, hey, I'd like your opinion on this. And with this head of a deity, at the time called head of a king, people were divided. Some was like, oh yes, it is genuine, it is original, it's pretty banged up. Others were like, oh, it's a total fake. And I'm looking at this like someone would not fake something that looks banged up. Usually you want people to be fooled and you want people to buy your object, and people generally tend to buy the pretty things. So this is what is going on in my head, just from looking at this piece of terracotta statue. And the only way to determine if a ceramic object is real or dates to the period you think it's dating, you do thermoluminescence. And we don't do the tests here. We take the samples and we send them to the lab. So basically, the sample will be reheated to measure the amount of the light that's being emitted. And this is basically measuring when was the last time that this object was in the kiln, was fired. So that's the test. So we did the test, and this is us taking samples. And you say, Caroline, there's nothing on your screen. Of course, there's nothing on my screen. You have to do this in the dark. And that's the frightening part. It is so scary to be drilling into an ancient artifact in the dark with somebody, me, holding the little red flashlight. So think of developing film back in the good old days in your little workroom with your red light. It's pretty much the same thing. The sample cannot be exposed to sunlight at all whatsoever. So you have to do this in the dark. I was the one holding the flashlight. my colleague, the late Noel Ocon, was the one drilling into the object to get the powder that we needed to put in a little plastic, in a little envelope, then in another little envelope, then in another little envelope, then you put it in a bigger envelope with the address and you mail it off to Oxford. This is what a lab looks like. So for them, it's also in the dark that they do this test. But, oh, there you go. These are the samples, very tiny, tiny holes. And it is old. It dates to what we thought it date. And I'm going to tell you a little story. We're going to talk about this a little bit later on. Little story. When we opened West Building in 2010, I wasn't finished with the research of the collection. And the editors kept telling me, like, stop sending us new labels. I know you have new info, but we have to stop somewhere, and we're stopping here. And this was not finished. I knew it was also not the head of a king, despite the hole that would have held a uraeus, like a snake, the symbol of the Egyptian pharaohs. The wig told me it is not the Nemes headdress, like that headscarf that you see on King Tut's mask. This is the wig, a divine wig. And so my label had not been changed. It still said head of a king. And I thought, well, what's the likelihood of another Egyptologist walking in during the like the ceremony, the opening event? Well, suddenly I'm in the galleries on opening night, and someone comes to me, Caroline, Ariel Kozlov is looking for you. Well, Ariel Kozlov's another Egyptologist. And so I went right to meet her. I was like, I know what you're talking about. Yes, I know it is not a king, it is Osiris. And yes, I agree with you, it's probably Amenhotep II. Long story short, but yes, another Egyptologist did walk into the building. And I had to go explain myself. Like, no, we're all good. We just need to change the label. But there's similar statues at the Cairo Museum, as you can see on the black and white image right there. So all this fun stuff is published in this catalog. So that's one of the projects that were mentioned on that little advert in 2005, happened in 2012. In 2007, we did the little reinstall of the Egyptian galleries. Before, you just had object labels. Suddenly, a timeline appears, a map appears, and we have thematic groupings that help people understand why these objects are displayed together, and give you more information about the geography of Egypt or whatever other information we had at the time. So it was a very minimal reinstall, but it was impactful. And the reason we also did it in 2007 is because of this. Who remembers the big lion out front? I see hands going up. Yes. Did you all come to the exhibition? The hands that went up? Yes, X, thank you. So that's the big exhibition from the British Museum that was mentioned on that advert. They asked me to come back because I was here for just for 9 months, like I said. They asked me to come back for the next year to work on that. And that was great fun. I was familiar with pretty much all the objects that you had in the exhibition, the really big, important works of art, statues notably. And I actually missed the installation of the big lion because guess what? I was giving a lecture. We also had wonderful programs. What is wrong with this picture? That was basically me for about 10, 15 minutes telling you what was wrong with the movie in terms of Egyptology. There were no camels in the Old Kingdom and things like this. And that one, we had an old one, a more recent one, like the 1999 Mummy movie, which is one of my favorites, and Prince of Egypt. So one for different, film aficionado. Who was at this event? Anybody? I saw a hand. Oh, yes, I see you two over there. That was probably the most fun event I have ever done at the museum, Style on the Nile, for this very exhibition on this very stage. It was about fashion. in ancient Egypt. And these are members of the Egyptian community who modeled for us the garments. This was actually one of my Halloween costumes when I was in grad school. The headdress did not make the move, but I had a fantastic headdress. This was my costume of Queen Nefertari, Ramses II's great royal wife. And we were demonstrating makeup, how to wear the garments and things like this. We had Walty from WRAL. She and I were the ones chatting about the costumes, about the dresses, the everything. And then we had the little fashion show, the whole royal family. And this person, that's him in real life. So it worked perfectly. The bald head for the king. It was a fantastic, it was sold out, standing room at the back. It was absolutely nuts. And we actually had a replica of King Tut's throne. So, oh, his name was Fami. I forget the lady's name, but they're the ones who are like, oh yeah, we can lend this to you. It's like, is it okay? Can we actually sit on it? It's like, yes, yes. So that's what you see on there. It was a fabulous event. And then we started doing, I started working a whole lot more with the education department, with the ancient collections. What is really cool is that you can get 3D scans of these objects, way more than a flat painting on the wall. So you could do things with archaeological collections that you cannot do with just paintings or drawings and things like this, photographs. So we started doing that, and now we have a whole slew of them that we can take into schools, along with some deaccessioned objects from the, oddly enough, Boston's Children's Museum. They thought of us when they deaccessioned some of their hands-on objects. So we have those in our collection. So a few Egyptian and a few Greek and Roman. So we do have ways to engage school children with the genuine objects, but also replicas made from these 3D scans. And then eventually we started working on this new building that was being built. And I'm just gonna get a sip of water, just 1 second. What happens when it's not working? I need more than 2 hands, apparently. So with West Building, so very often a curator will reinstall or create from scratch a new gallery, maybe once in their lifetime. Right now I'm at number 2, and I've been at the museum about 5 years. This was great fun. We played with our big, huge dollhouse, setting everything up. And I was very happy that in the new West Building, we were going to have a dedicated gallery for ancient Egypt, because this is what it looked like. Ancient Egyptian Gallery was the party space at NCMA until we moved to the other side. And you can hardly see the objects. They're mostly decorative. So, and it's not good to have also, like there was, you can't see it right here, you had the bust of Sekhmet right over there. You had to put a plexi bonnet on top of it because people would put their wine glass on the platform, which was really scary to all the curators, the conservators, and the registrar. Hey, Maggie. Like, this is not safe for the collection. So I was really happy that we had a space very far away from the party space, all the way down over there. Now, I just want to go through some of the cool things we did with this gallery. And for me, the important thing was to bring context, make connections, and demystify Egypt. A beloved object, an ancient model from a tomb. It is a pastiche, i.e. it's made from different parts. Rowers and sailors do not exist on the same boat, not because it doesn't happen, but the Egyptians always had one for the sailing journey and one for the rowing journey. So two separate vessels typically in the tomb. But in this case, you have both the guys rowing, these little guys right over here, and then you have the people manning the sail right there. That does not exist. But this is a really cool object that you can use to illustrate the Nile as sort of the highway of ancient Egypt. And if you have a really fun photo mural, you call up all your Egyptological friends and say, hey, who's got a really nice view of Aswan, where you see the river, a little bit of the green, and then you see the desert cliffs on the other side, and you are not in the picture. There's no person in the picture. There's no felucca in the picture. It's like only Egyptologists have those kinds of photos because we're there working in Egypt long enough that you can get a snap where nobody is in your picture. So this one, I believe, was from my colleague at the ROM. And we're putting the vitrine on top of the boat. And one thing I was scared that the boat would look like it got stuck on this rock right over here. And no, it's sailing right past. These are the concerns of curators. And then we had this one, which is, again, another very lovely object. Our only full-size pharaoh depicted on there, Ptolemy II, who's a Greek pharaoh. And I wanted to show that not all sites in Egypt have been reconstructed from the fragments, that there's a lot of places where you just get a mound of rocks, of blocks. Not everything looks like Karnak, for example. Things look like this. Not all the sites have had the same TLC, let's just put it that way. So I wanted to illustrate that with this object. And I have to say, I really loved all those murals. I think this was from a colleague at the British Museum, Neil Spencer, I think it was. And here's one of our docents reusing those costumes that we had on Style on the Nile for some Egyptian family day that I forget when it was. But Frank was a good sport and dressed up. And then we had also a queen and somebody else. And for whatever reason, all the kids wanted to tour with the pharaoh. Now, in 2010, we also, I say we, but me, included some loans from the Weinberg collection. Fairly early on in my tenure at the museum, my predecessor told me, he's like, Caroline, there's a gentleman you need to know. He collects ancient Egyptian art. He's very lovely, and I think he might like to know you as well, because hey, you're an Egyptologist and you now work at this museum. So I met Dr. Weinberg and his family a long time ago, and we've been friends since. And when I asked him, I'd like to borrow some of your objects to make it clear what the false door is all about, and that it is a place that marks the part of the tomb that is public, where people can go and make offerings. And that's part of the demystifying Egypt. There's a part of an ancient Egyptian tomb that you are allowed to go in. The priest can go in, the family can go in, even random visitors can go in, as long as they bring offerings or they speak out loud the funerary offering formula. And to sort of really put the context around this piece, what if we have an offering table, a bowl and a beaker? People associate a bowl with food or something, or a beaker with something to drink. So he's like, absolutely, off we go. We have these objects. But they were not the only ones. We had a little section, these two vitrines right here, where we talked about materials and techniques. So I wanted something in those vitrine that had wood and faience, and this lovely smurf colored ushabti. It's such a beautiful color. The Egyptians were so fond of faience of that color that it was a preferred color. You have paler blues, you can have white and purplish, yellow. It's a man-made thing. You could put the correct minerals to get the color that you want, but that is the preferred color, which we did not have in the collection. People kept telling us, I keep expecting Egyptian galleries to have jewelry in them, and we had diddly squat. So a necklace and a mirror came to us on loan as well. And then Osiris. We had Isis, his wife, twice, but we had no Osiris. And that's a little section with gods and temples in ancient Egypt. So those are all loans that came for the 2010, and they were actually donated to the museum in 2016. So I had to do some research and make an acquisition proposal for that. With that gallery as well, conservation is important. And with the coffins, we found out that the coffin of Amun-Red, the one that is lying down there, needed to be displayed flat, not upright. And the reason for this was that the wood is basically covered in like plaster, basically gesso, some kind of covering that makes it even, and then you paint on it. Unfortunately, over 2,000 years, the wood had shrunk and the gesso was no longer attached to the wood, especially near the bottom of the object, so that when it was propped up upright, the weight of the coffin was resting on the gesso, not on the wood. And we didn't have an objects conservator here at the museum at that time, so these had to be sent to New York for treatment, came back, filled, like those little gaps were filled, but the recommendation is like you need to display this flat. And then the designers, like, oh my God, this is going to ruin our display because they're supposed to be both of them standing up. It's like, but it's okay. You can have, well, it looks like a morgue drawer. You just open the thing, you put it down. It's okay for the coffin of Amun-Red to be displayed that way because that's how you would be in a tomb. So you have here King Tut, because you always have lots of photos of the stuff from that tomb. And there's the coffin in the big stone sarcophagus. And it's okay to have the other one upright because that's what it would be at the funeral. So it means we can use how the place is displayed, the object is displayed to explain how it was inside a tomb. All you need is a few words on the label. Also, this particular piece, this weird plexi mount was not good for the object. So we had a whole fun project where we came up with a mummy form on which to place the trappings, the mummy trappings, the golden plaques. And so we created a little version of it. And that little mini mummy me went to Brooklyn with our designer to go see the one that I had mentioned to them. Like, we want something that looks similar to this. And that's how we got our own little, well, not so little, faux mummy to basically be the support for all these gilded plaques. And as NCMA likes to do, we had blog posts about this and the whole process, and just to engage with visitors that might not be able to come to the museum or want more details. Talking about golden, now we're gonna come to 2020, and 2020, I'm sure you will remember, you may have wanted to block out 2020, most of us do, but this came to the museum, or was supposed to come to the museum in 2020, and that did not quite work out as planned. It came in 2021 in the spring. And this is one of those kind of fortuitous moments. Going to conferences, meeting with colleagues. Luckily, the curators and conservators have money for travel, for exhibitions and research. And I had gone to an Egyptological meeting of just curators. So this is part of ICOM, the International Council of Museums. There's a subgroup just for Egyptology. And at the beginning of each conference, all of us were curators. Sometimes you have university professors who attend, but they're not necessarily curators. They just work with the collections. So the curators do a 5-minute spiel, what's going on at their museum. And at one conference, we were supposed to have another show from the British Museum. And then the following year, I had to report that that went down the drain and we're no longer doing a mummy thing from the British Museum. And suddenly I feel this little tap on my shoulder, and it's my colleague, Campbell Price from Manchester Museum. He's like, Caroline, I've got something for you. Let's go have a coffee afterwards. And he mentioned golden mummies. He was developing the show at the time, and he's like, this is perfect for you, your institutions, blah, blah, blah. I ended up being one of the reviewers for the catalog. He put a little Nubia section in there just for me. That's how golden mummies came to the museum. It was challenging installs via Zoom, because the team could not travel from the UK. Yes, 2020 was just 2020. And as we're walking in every single day to install this, we had to have our temperature checked. The objects are light sensitive, so the rooms had to be dark. We're constantly meeting on Zoom, never in person. It just makes it a little bit more challenging. And all our programming was also all online, virtual. Even the Caroline and Campbell show, we met so many times to do programs together online. We thought we need to start our own channel or something. Even the American Research Center in Egypt asked us to do a tour for their conference. Of course, we recorded it, and then, we didn't do this live. But everything was online, and then we had things to offer to other museums or Egyptological societies to help with their weird 2020, 2021 programming. And also in 2019, like I said, I'm jumping a little bit back and forth. My colleague, Amanda Maples, who's now at New Orleans, wanted to do an intervention. So this is when we had moments in the galleries where we paired up objects from other collections to make connections between these pairings. And she had wanted an Egyptian headrest to go in the African galleries. I was like, well, I knew a guy. So sent Gerhard an email telling her about my colleague's project, and he happily sent it to us. And then it was donated to the museums just a few years later, and we're in 2021, 2, I forget. It was really hard during the pandemic to do research on anything. You couldn't even get interlibrary loans. And the only book about where there was a study of ancient Egyptian headrests was a French dissertation published just a little bit before mine. And the only thing, there were two options. I had to go to France at the university to go see the dissertation, or borrow it on microfiche. Microfiche, this is almost as old as ancient Egyptian stuff. So there we are. I'm with our library assistant, who's now our full librarian, at the State Library and Archives using their microfiche reader. And you get horrible pictures like this because the pictures being scanned and then reproduced, and you can't tell what's the shadow and what's the actual headrest. It was just horrible doing research during the pandemic. But there's the display right here. It was hard to see. That's the intervention. And this is where it is today in the Africa We Ought to Know gallery. I'll go through this quickly, but by this time, how many times I am going to install the Egyptian galleries? Three. Third time. Similar kind of setup, but during the pandemic, of course. And we played with our little objects. We were 6 feet apart from each other with our masks. We'd leave each other little notes. Can I borrow this? Can I move this over there? Has anybody seen my whatever? And then sometimes a crocodile or a dinosaur would appear to visit your galleries. You know, these are the visitors we get on a regular basis, of course. And for this reinstall as well, I wanted some extra objects, and Dr. Weinberg always has what I need. So he's my go-to person. So we added more jewelry, a mace head, and well, I guess we don't have preview paper copies anymore. Now it's virtual, it's online. But this last issue that came out, I guess, end of February, there's a spotlight on Dr. Weinberg, because last year, spring 2025, I got an email about a week before I go on vacation in Barbados with my dad. It's like, Caroline, I've decided I'm giving the collection now. You're not going to get it after I pass. I decided I want to make this happen while I'm still alive. I want to see it going to you and see things eventually get placed into the galleries. And so Caroline went, Maggie, our registrar who's sitting right over here. And we did, I think, 7 trips to Dr. Weinberg's house to go tag the objects. And I'm just going to show you a few pictures. 243. This was a long time ago. It's a promised gift. It just came to us a little bit earlier. It's really hard to explain how well the collection fits with what we have. It really will enable us to tell completely different stories at the museum. Our little collection is 47 objects. When all of this is accessioned, we have to do research on this. And when I say we, yet again, Caroline has to do research on this. It will be basically almost 300 objects, on par with the ancient American and a little bit more than the ancient Greek, Italian, and Roman collection. So before we could move anything to the museum, we had to tag every single object. And lucky for us, let me go back, Dr. Weinberg, as the most conscientious collector of antiquities that I've known, the only one who has a binder with information, who has receipts, who has paperwork, who has things that will help me do the research. This is practically unheard of. He needs a round of applause. Collectors buy pretty things, but Dr. Weinberg bought pretty things that also had provenance and also was very serious about authenticity as well. So during those 7 trips, 7 Fridays, off we went. And then eventually all these beautiful objects got packed by our conservators and art handlers, and Maggie and I were there and brought everything home. We also did the same thing later that year with books, because Dr. Weinberg also donated his Egyptological library, which is actually bigger than mine, donated to the museum. And Greg, thank you so much for your help. Thank goodness there's a dumbwaiter. So the box of books could go to the basement and straight into our vehicles. there's a lot of people at the museum who have now been looking at these objects, taking measurements, taking notes. And there are some objects that I want to include in the Nubia exhibition. So we had a little show and tell. Our favorite is a little hedgehog. He's hard to see. I don't know no, I don't. But I'm happy to report that the first objects that were already here at the museum, because of the 22 reinstall, were proposed to the collections committee on Wednesday, this past Wednesday. Both were accepted with great enthusiasm. And so these objects are now in the NCMA collection. And one thing, while I was doing research, provenance research is always important, but with the information that came from that binder, let me go back, is what I had here. So it was in the Drexel Institute, then sold to Minneapolis, then Blumka, and then it got to Sands of Times, and then they sold that to Dr. Weinberg. When I was doing research, the bits in red were discovered quite fortuitously. I emailed the lady who owns Sands of Time, and she sent me an article that one of the collectors had written about the Drexel collection. His name is Ben Herrer. He's an Egyptologist. And suddenly I could go back to 1895. This is well beyond the UNESCO Convention of 1970. And I can fill in the gaps between 1958 and 2011. So this is impeccable provenance. So Dr. Weinberg is like, I don't think you had all that information, and I'm sure you're delighted to see that it went even further than you thought. So these are the objects I'll be proposing for the June and September meetings. The Shabti of Hori and his wife on the left, he was the viceroy of Kush, and the whole exhibition is about Kush, which is basically Egypt's rival in the Nile Valley. But the Egyptian colonial period is not in the exhibition. So we'll have a little teeny section at the back, at the end of the exhibition, that talks a little bit about that with these objects. We also didn't really have any royal Shabtis. There are plenty Kushite Nubian royal Shabtis in the exhibition. And the only one we have currently in our collection is the head of a Shabti of King Akhenaten. So lo and behold, there are a few royal Shabtis in the Weinberg collection. And I'm showing you here King Susinis the First, because I'm gonna go off on a quick tangent. King Susinis the First is the Silver Pharaoh. His tomb was discovered in 1940 by the real Indiana Jones, because it was discovered at Tanis, so Raiders of the Lost Ark Tanis, by Pierre Montet, who's a French Egyptologist. And he discovered this like just as the war had started. And this, coming kind of full circle, was the topic of the first ever Weinberg Lecture of Egyptology in 2012, The Secrets of the Silver Pharaoh by Peter Lacovera, who was then at the Carlos Museum. That was our first Weinberg Lecture. So going back to these little Shabtis, these all relate to Nubia in some weird shape and form, because when the Nubians, and you'll have to come to my lecture about Nubia later in the year, Nubia also controlled Egypt at some point in time, and they did when Egypt was fragmented in different parts where it wasn't a unified rule, and you had the high priests of Amun in Thebes ruling. You had King Tekelot II, which you've never heard of, but that's okay. He was also ruling his own little corner of Egypt, and the Nubians just march in and reunify the whole entire country. So I wanted to put those objects in there because the show is just about Kush, it's just about Nubia, but we talk a lot about how the Nubians basically Nubianized Egyptian material culture. And I say the Nubians, I should say the Nubian royal family, because they're the only ones using Egyptian material or Egyptian style material in their tombs. So I wanted to show the real Egyptian stuff so that we could compare. A little statuette of a king, a heart scarab, a lot of amulets. So this is what I'm going to be working on between now and mid-May to write up all these proposals so that we can continue accepting acquisitions into the collection. It's not because it's been donated, as the article in preview said, that we just accept. We have to do due diligence and research everything to ensure that it is what we think it is. It is a long and tedious process. And just to give you an example, my colleague, Tashay Smith, who last year received a donation of 59 African object from Rhonda Wilkerson, it took her a whole year. So like 4 different meetings for 59 objects. I have 243. So I think I will be doing this until I retire. That's what it feels like anyways. But I just want to say thank you to Gerhard and Jan for your friendship, for your support, and your amazing gift. Like I said, I'm very honored to be the Weinberg speaker this year. Thank you. Are there any questions? I see a hand. Yes. I think for that particular object, I think the information came from the dealer. So very often, and my predecessor was a Greek scholar, was not an expert of anything Egyptian, probably just took that at face value. And at some point, either the dealer had made a typo with the 33rd, right, rather than a 23rd. I'm not sure what that typo happened, but it is clearly a typo because Egyptian chronology goes through Dynasty 30, then it's the Second Persian period, then Greek period, then Roman period. So technically, yes, there are 33, but the last 3 are not counted as dynasties. So, but the thing is, scholarship also changes. As you go through the years, you discover new things, you get new information, there's new studies, so that you can go back and say, hey, now we think it's this rather than that. So curators will generally go through their collections, especially if you come across an article and you go, wait, we have one of those objects, one of those paintings in our collection. You go back, revisit, I need to reinvestigate. So we often do reinvestigations and do more research, and things will change. Yeah, you don't want things to be static. New discoveries very often bring new information. So that's very important to keep doing that on a regular basis. I hope that answers your question. Yes, over there. Right now, the question was like, where can one access the translations of the hieroglyphs? The Egyptian catalog. I don't know if they're still in the museum shop. If not, send me an email. You can find my email on the website in the About section. I have a few extra copies left. Any other questions? Yes. Thank you. Um, yeah, so the question was basically they're grateful for the behind the scenes, like they didn't know the kind of work that we do. What got me interested in Egyptology? I will make the answer very short. I was very fortunate as a child to live in East Africa for a year and a half because of my dad's job. And on the way back to Canada, my parents decided that we needed to stop in Cairo, Athens, Rome, Paris, and London. So I was at the age where in school we had studied ancient Egypt. And a few months later, there I am looking at the pyramids. And the first museum I remember visiting as a child is the Cairo Museum. So I think the rest is history. Any other questions? Oh, I said the back. Well, let's start that one because otherwise I will forget what the answer is. So the first question was, is it typical for the example that I shown where you have an object in a museum that gets sold and ends up in a private collection? Not so much anymore. We don't deaccession in the way that people deaccessioned in the past. That one, it was sold from Drexel to another museum, Minneapolis. And then that was sold. And I reached out to Minneapolis to find out, like, why did you let go of this object? And it was too long ago. Like the registrar is like, we don't have that information in our files. We just have the information that it was, there was a card that said obtained from Drexel and then sold to Blumka. Back in the days when you actually had paper cards. And so that's where the information came from. And then whenever it ends up on the art market, it could be acquired by yet another museum or a private collector. It really depends on who bids on it or who's interested in it. So you said question number 2. So the question is about the CAT scans and do we do MRIs? I don't think, I've never done MRIs. I think it depends what you're actually looking for. We do x-rays a lot. We have an x-ray machine here at the museum. Oh, and there was something else I wanted to say. It just like went out my perimenopausal brain, I tell you. What was this, the second half you said? Oh yeah. Since we don't have that here, usually it's an actual medical facility. Yeah. So when we went with the grain mummy, just down the road, and we walk in with our little box, and so we check in just like a patient, like, oh, we're here with the grain mummy, and then suddenly you could hear this whisper, the grain mummy people are here. The mummy people are. And so they had reserved a spot on the schedule like they would for a medical appointment because there was nobody at that time. And I don't think they had to recalibrate the machine or anything. But we had our time slot and the little grain mummy went to the doctors basically. So yeah, so very often if we have connections, and those very often come through members who are doctors or who are whatever. And it's like, yeah, you could come at my clinic on that day. There's nobody that afternoon kind of thing. So that just happened to work out beautifully for us. Yes. One last, no, yes. Yes, you. So a grain mummy is basically an object that you use during the festival of Osiris. It is a late period thing. And so there's a process. So the grain mummy is made during the month of Hoyak in preparation for that festival because it takes a little while. You need the grains to germinate. and then you put the two halves together, and then you wrap it up in your little grain mummy shape. And it's almost like during that time, it's the closest things that we would have today is like a passion play. So instead of, Jesus and the cross and whatnot, it's Osiris. And Osiris was the first mythical king of Egypt who died, but was reborn in the afterlife. So it's celebrating Osiris. And those little grain mummies, there would be one buried per cemetery. So for everybody. Earlier, there's other similar kinds that also talk about Osiris, and the one that might be easier for you to find online is the Osiris bed that was found in King Tut's tomb. So think of it as an Osiris-shaped planter with grains in it, and it would germinate. So it's basically a symbol of resurrection, the life cycle of plants. Yeah. So the question is, do we have any concerns about things to be repatriated? That's why we do the provenance research. We try to push it back to 1970, which is the date of the UNESCO convention, which I think Egypt did not sign until at least 83. So we try to do research to go as far back as possible with the provenance. Most of our collection, Egypt already has in gazillions of examples. To be quite honest, like we don't have the Rosetta Stone. We don't have some of the big things that are kind of like hot ticket items for Egypt to want to get back. We are fully aware that anybody could come knocking at our door saying, we need to repatriate this, and they need to be able to prove that it was looted, stolen, or whatever. And then it becomes a legal issue with the state legal. So yeah. But right now, like I'm not worried with what we have in the Egyptian collection. Yeah. Well, thank you so very much for coming.